Well, I want to welcome you to the Power to Be series. And our topic for today is the power to get back up. I don't think there's a one of us here that at some point in our life has not had the rug pulled out from under us. And many times when the rug is pulled out from under you, you're not ready for it. Because one of the interesting things about life is as you live, two things are going to happen to you continually. Unpredictable events and uncontrollable events. When those things happen to your life, they come to you most of the time as a surprise. And because most people live from their emotions up, not their mind down, it just roams around inside of them and nibbles at them. And the more it nibbles, the less of you there is to get back up. So this is why I think this part of the power to be, the power to get back up, is so critical. And here's our thought. One thing is true about life. The road you travel is never a straight road, correct?
Absolutely.
And nor is it without curves, hills, detours, potholes are in Florida, sinkholes, and all the other unexpected things that demand your full attention. Because why? Where your intention wanders, a collision with yourself is going to happen. Now, when I talk about a curve, what is it? We're at a pace in our life that we can't manage it. And as we go around the curve, because we are moving emotionally faster than we can manage, there's going to be an accident. What about a hill? It's a time in your life when you need energy. But because most of us do not have a lifestyle that recharges us, we live with a lifestyle that continues to deplete our energy. When that hill comes in life and it's one of those unexpected things and you need that surge of energy, we just don't have it. What about a detour? It's when all of a sudden the road you're traveling becomes a dead end. You ever been there? You thought you were headed in the right direction. But all of a sudden the road you're traveling just becomes a dead end. And now what happens? You live in a world of uncertainty. What about a pothole? You're walking straight ahead, but you're looking from side to side and you're not focused. And all of a sudden, there's a calamity in front of you and you just fall into it. And all of these things are unpredictable. They're unexpected things in life. But with every action, there's a result. So if I live unprepared, every time the rug is pulled out from under me, the majority of people get up less than what they were. So the challenge is, how do you and I learn to get back up when life knocks us down? And I want to use me as the example for the presentation today. I was born in New Orleans. If you ask me about my real mom, my natural mom, up to just a few years ago, the only thing I knew about her that she was a prostitute in New Orleans. And I was the result of a one-night stand that she had with some guy. If you could see my birth certificate where it says father, there's no name. Have no idea of who my dad was. And I don't know if you understand this or not, but sometimes alone in a hotel room or scooting across the sky in an airplane, my mind starts to wander with, who was he? What part of my weirdness do I get from him? But I have no way of finding out. I was adopted when I was 2 weeks old. And the home that I was adopted into was a very unusual home because I never heard my dad say over 10 words inside our house. My mother ruled our house. You ever seen one of those? My mother looked at you and went, jump. And you didn't go, how high? You went, how long do I hang here? And I'm the type of person, if I asked you a question, I don't want to hear, because I said so. That is the second dumbest remark that a parent ever pays to a child. Do you know what the first dumbest remark is? Shut up. I used to have parents bring their kids to me for counseling, and they'd tell the kid, talk to him. So the kid would start talking. All of a sudden, the kid would tell me something the parent didn't want him to say. And they'd look at the kid and go, shut up. And I'd look at the kid, and kid look at me, and we'd look at the parents, and we'd look back at each other, and we knew where the problem was. My mother and I had a very, very unhealthy relationship. When I was 12, my dad walked in from the shipyards in New Orleans and informed us that he had quit his job and that we were moving to Oklahoma. Thursday the next week, we're in Ardmore, Oklahoma. When I was 15, my mother set me down one night and told me if I was to live, and notice her word, if I was to live in her house, I had to pay room and board. Now, we didn't need money. My dad made more money than anybody around us. But it was my mother's way of having control over the situation. So I got a job at a local IGA grocery store. And every day after football or tennis practice, after school, I'd go to work, and I'd work till 9 o'clock, and I'd call my dad to come get me. And I'd been 16 for 2 weeks, and I'm a person who believes that God has a sense of humor. I mean, if all of us have one area of knowledge we're not good with, mine is math. Listen, I used to close my checking account every 4 months to get my balance because I knew the bank was spending my money. You ever put money in the bank and you turn around and it's just gone? Like there's a vacuum cleaner attached to it and just sucks it out of your account. So God in his infinite wisdom gave me the easiest birth date in the world. I was born 2/3/4/5. It is the only way I ever remember it. And I'd been 16 for 2 weeks. And I called my dad on a Thursday night, just like I always did, to come get me. And Dad drove up in front of the grocery store just like he always did. And I started to walk toward the car, and my dad opened the car door, and he looked across the top of the car, and he said, "Richard, wait a minute." Folks, I didn't know what was going on. When you're 16 going on 12, life doesn't make a lot of sense. So I just stopped, and my dad stepped out in back of the car into a street light, and I knew what was happening because what my dad was carrying was a suitcase. And he walked over to where I was standing, and he set the suitcase down beside me. And I was informed that night that my mother had made the decision I could no longer live in her house. My dad walked over and he set the suitcase down beside me, took that giant hand and squeezed my shoulder and said, "Richard, I don't understand this, but son, I don't know what to do." Now, we've all been at that point, have we not? And then fighting back the tears in his life, because my dad came from a time in life when men did not express emotions. Ladies, have any of you ever had a male in your life that couldn't express emotions? And we know it is a medical fact. Women outlive men. Now, women don't kill men in most situations. Men kill themselves because they bury their stress. One of the challenges for a male is to handle a woman who is stressful and unloading it. But that's how they get it out. Fighting back the tears in his eyes, my dad looked at me and he said, "Richard, son, don't you ever forget this. I love you very much." And you got to understand, in here, not out there, but in here, I never doubted whether my dad loved me or not. But I knew my mother didn't. From the age of 6 to the age of 16, there wasn't a day in my life that my mother didn't walk into my presence and make one of 3 statements to me. "You are the stupidest kid I've ever met in my life." Do you think as a child that would affect you? Huh? You think it would play with your self-esteem? Or my mother would look at me and go, "You'll never amount to anything in life." Do you think that played with me? Or the one that would rip my heart out? I don't love you. I have never loved you, and I am sorry we adopted you. And my best day will be the day that you're no longer in my house. What do you think that would do to you as a child? I mean, can you imagine saying something like that to a child? I have 3 sisters. None of my sisters are real sisters. We're all adopted from different families. Did you know that when I was growing up, I never had a birthday cake? My sisters did. Did you know I never got a Christmas present? You have any idea what it would be like to go down on Christmas morning watching your sisters open presents and you stand there because there's nothing under the tree with your name on it? I knew my mother did not care for me. That night when I was 16, my dad didn't walk back to the car, he ran back to the car and stopped and paused over the top of the car. And I don't know if you've in your life ever had a moment that seemed like it lasts forever. And my dad stood looking across the top of the car with the car door open, and finally he looked at me and he said, "You take care of yourself." And the next memory I have in my life is a guy grabbed me by the back of the neck and squeezing my neck and screaming at me, "Get out of the street," because I'm standing in the middle of the road watching my dad drive out of my life, because that's my life. I mean, what do you do? The emotions that were going through me were overwhelming. And I have these feelings, and one of them is, how can you say you love me and drive off? I walked back over to the corner where the suitcase was and stood there and looked at that suitcase for a while trying to figure out, what am I going to do? I mean, what do you do when you're 16? I finally told myself, you can't spend the rest of your life standing on a street corner. So I picked up the suitcase and I walked into downtown Ardmore, Oklahoma, and I went to the Hotel Ardmore. And I walked in and I told them I needed a room, and they looked at me funny because I looked mighty young, but I had cash. So I paid them for the room, and I went upstairs to the 7th floor and put the key in the door and opened the door and never turned the lights on. Just walked across the room and opened the window and looked down 7 floors because there are no screens on the Hotel Ardmore. And I crawled out and I sat on that ledge, and the next time I looked at my little Timex watch, 5 hours had gone by. Because on that ledge, I was wrestling with my life. And I had to come to grips with what had happened. And folks, let me say this to you. I understand people who commit suicide, because the only human that can ever take their life is a person who feels if they were gone, no one would ever miss them. And after about 5 hours, I crawled back in because I made a decision on that ledge. If I jumped, my mother would win. And I wasn't about to give that lady that victory in my life. Next morning, as early as I knew he was up, I picked up the phone and I called a young man that I know, because his 2 children were my best friends. And I told Troy what had happened. He said, "You wait there, I'll be there as soon as I can." About 45 minutes later, he's in my room, and we sit there and we go back and forth for about 2 to 3 hours. And he finally looks at me and says, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm not going back home." So Troy helped me find a room with a lady in town who was the editor of the daily newspaper. And I paid that lady $5 a week to live in her house. Every day I'd get up and I'd go to school. I'd go to football or tennis practice. I'd go to work. I'd come back. And I would sit at her dining room table until I couldn't keep my eyes open, because I knew that when I went into that little bedroom that was dark and I crawled into that cold bed, I was going to cry myself to sleep. Do you know what it's like to feel all alone and that no one cares about you? You know what it's like to be there and wonder what's wrong with you because your natural mother didn't want you and your adopted mother didn't want you, so there must be something really wrong with you. And I struggled with that. When I was a freshman in college, I decided that I had to go and confront my mom and dad. And please don't forget this. It's probably the third most important philosophy I've ever written in life. Anything in life you don't confront, you validate. Anything in life you don't confront has continuation in your life. It'd be interesting to know if I spent time in your life, if I'd find any issues in your life that nibble at your spirit because you've never confronted them. Anything in life that when alone with you sometimes, it comes back and you play with it. Because the things that we don't complete in our life never go away. And in reality, they create the picture that we have of ourselves. Listen, I didn't think I was lovable. I didn't think I was intelligent. I believed what my mother had told me. Because why? When you're a child, who's the most important people in your life? It's your parents. And what type of influence do parents have on children as to what they believe about themselves? So I decided something. If I'm ever going to move forward in my life, and hear me, you can only go two directions in life. You go in circles, which means I never get beyond what I'm struggling with, or I go forward. And the only way you ever get to go forward is if you confront those things that are nibbling at your spirit, those things that keep eating at you, those things that you keep accepting that make you less than you. It was 62 miles from my dormitory room to my mom and dad's front door. I got to their house, and I did slow down, but I drove right on by. Couldn't you imagine the fear that was going on inside of me? Because it's never easy to face the things in life that you are emotionally struggling with. 16 miles down the road past their house, I pulled over. And I had this come to Jesus meeting with me. If you don't do this now, you're never going to do it. Because if you avoid this situation, you won't come back. So I turned around and went back, and there was a filling station across from my mom and dad's house. And I pulled there just trying to get the courage to drive across the street. Do you know how much I wanted to run away? Do you know how much I wanted to say, it's not worth it? But again, the voice inside me said, if you don't deal with it, it'll own you the rest of your life. So I shot my car across the street, got out of my car, and ran to my mom and dad's front door because I knew if I walked, I would run back to the car. You ever had a time in life when you needed to deal with something and you got real close and turned and ran away? There was a screen door and a wooden door, and I knocked on the screen door, and my dad was the person, and he opened the wooden door, and when my dad saw me, he just turned white. I said, Dad, I need to talk to you and Mama. I wish you could have been there because my dad didn't bother to unlock the screen door. He stepped right through the screen door. And with one hug, my dad told me everything that had been going on inside of him. And by the way, folks, we don't hug enough today. You ever needed a mental hug? You ever gone the second extra mile with somebody, the second mile, and you didn't have to do it? You did it because you cared, and no one even said thank you. Can that pull you down? You ever needed an emotional hug? And what's an emotional hug? It's not words. It's just someone being there because they know you need their support at that moment. You ever had a time in your life you turned and looked for that support and they were gone? You ever needed a physical hug? You ever walked up to someone special in your life and went, need a hug? Because aren't hugs a connection? And my dad, through that hug, reconnected with me. The guy literally carried me into the living room of the house. And the whole time just babble, 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 babble. Didn't understand anything that guy was saying. And finally, my dad realized that my mother wasn't there. So he stopped and he hit himself on the forehead and called for my mother, who was in the kitchen fixing breakfast, to come see who was there. And my mother stepped between the kitchen and the living room where my dad and I were. And when my mother saw me, she just froze. Never took her eyes off of me. Took her left hand, reached around behind her, untied her apron, and let it fall to the floor. Took her right hand, reached over to the table that was always there. Picked up her purse, took out her car keys, walked out the back door, got in her car, and drove off. And I never saw her again. Do you think my childhood has played with me over the years? Do you think my childhood has made it a challenge for me to learn to accept myself? How many times do you think I've allowed life to knock me down because I didn't trust me, I didn't believe in me, and I'd get real close sometimes to what I said I wanted, and because of fear, what would that fear do? It would pull the rug out from under me. But let me tell you about something about me today. If you really got to know me, I am probably the most self-confident person you'll ever meet in your life. Folks, I throw parties, and I'm the only one I invite. You want to talk about great parties? The conversations are just unreal. If you threw a party and only invited you, would you go? How long would you stay before you got bored? You ever been around people who can't spend time alone with themselves? Why? Because alone with them, they got to deal with the things in life they're running from. And one of the lessons that we have to learn in life, anything you think you're running from, you're running toward. So this is why this thought is so important. One thing is true about life. It's never a straight line. Never. Nor is it without curves or hills, detours or potholes, and all the other unexpected things that demand your full attention. Because if you don't pay attention, a crash is going to happen. And folks, most of the time that crash is with yourself. And it's not something you can do every now and then. You've got to pay attention to yourself every day. Now, I want to put a couple of terms up here. One of the things I'm working on right now, and I've finished 3 volumes, is I'm writing 5 volumes of dictionaries. And what I'm doing is I'm taking 150 words that you use every single day of your life that you misdefine. And what I'm trying to do is bring them to a place where they don't have a negative attachment, but they have a positive meaning to your life. So, let me put a few of these in front of you to lay our foundation. Your life. Now, that's an interesting word. Look at my definition. Your life. The time you have been given on this earth to define who you are and what you want through the choices and behaviors you bring to each day, which creates the pathway you're traveling. At that time in my life, as a child, with everything I went through, do you think I would have had a reason to go over into the corner and lay in the fetal position and blame life? You ever been around someone who uses blame as their description of life? It's never their fault. God must not like them anymore. They don't understand why all these bad things keep happening to them. But your life is very simple. It's your choice. Now here's what you learned about choice. Every choice you make creates a pathway. That pathway is filled with your behavior. And if you stayed around me long enough, you'd hear my 3 words that I'm famous for. Behavior never lies. That the essence of truth is not what you talk about, it's about what you do. You ever been around people who say one thing and do another? Do you think that contradiction creates a negative pathway for them to walk? Because the essence of truth is not what you say, it's what you do. And reality is this: this is your life. It is your time. And my definition of time is real simple. The space between the day you were born and the day you die, and you get to fill in the blank. Because days don't bring us events. They bring us choices. Days are never upside down until you choose for it to be. Because every day of your life is whatever you want it to be. And the reality is, this is your life filled with your choices, filled with your behavior, filled with your definition of who you are. And that definition is always clear through behavior. Personal strength. Interesting word. Here's my definition. Your internal foundation that believes in who you are, what you can achieve, and is unwilling to settle for anything less than your best. You ever been around people who just hang out in life? And these people are really easy to spot because one of the big words in their vocabulary is the word try. What we fail to understand, try is a derivative of doubt. And every time you tell yourself or you tell somebody, I'm going to try, you've already defeated yourself. You've already pulled the rug out. Because try says, I don't believe I can do it. But when you have personal strength, you have a foundation of trust you stand on. And do you think behavior ever defines whether you trust yourself or not? You have a foundation of beliefs. Not opinions, but beliefs. Those are your line in the sand that are there to define who you are. And when you have that personal trust, you have those beliefs that form your core, every day what do? You live with behaviors that strengthen you personally. And without personal strength, I promise you one thing. You'll live a life less than what you said you want. So, without a strong foundation of personal strength, you will live in a world with starts and stops. If I came to your life, would I find any stacks of things that you've started but you haven't completed? Huh? If I came to your life, would I find things that you were excited about that lost their excitement and they're just laying there now? We joke about this, but if I want to learn about you, there are 3 things I'm going to study. The top of your desk where you work. Because here's what I'm looking for. If you're right-handed, it's one way, but if you're left-handed, just reverse the process. I know that if you're right-handed, everything laying on the left-hand side of your desk you're procrastinating with. Anything on the floor you're avoiding. Any of you ever been guilty of going in and just moving things around so you feel like you accomplished something? You straighten up the clutter and go, that was good. Second thing I want to study is the trunk of your car. It's a collection center. I love it when they send people to the airport to pick me up. And we're going to put my luggage in their trunk. I was in San Francisco and walked out and asked the lady, can we put my bag in your trunk? Slammed her hand on the trunk and said, if you open this trunk, we'll never get it closed again. Dayton, Ohio. We were moving things around to get my bag in. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this blue shoe appeared. And the lady looked at your shoe and said, I've been looking for this for 6 months. You know the third thing I want to look at? Your garage. You ever seen people's cars parked out front because they can't get them in the garage? And how many times does the garage become the center of procrastination? You put it in there and you tell people, well, we're going to get to that. That was 5 years ago. Folks, without a strong foundation of personal strength, you will live in a world of start and stops. With this as your design, you will always have to walk through chaos. Do you know what chaos is? It's like a substance that every time you step into it, it makes it more challenging to step forward. So let's play a game with you. What steals most of people's personal strength? Use this as a checklist and see if any of this is true about you. Sameness. Every day you live in the same world you lived in yesterday. Which means what? Your life lacks adventure. And I know if you're living in sameness, you're living in fear. Because you stay the same, not because you have to, you stay the same because of fear. And one of the biggest battles you face in your life is the battle between your desire to go forward and your fear of going forward, which traps you in a circle. How many times have you had someone in your life who talked about what they were going to do when? And it was always when the time was right, when they felt comfortable with it. Let me tell you something. That's an excuse. Every day you justify sameness, you shut down the opportunity to have a better tomorrow. Truth they can't handle. When I was living in the world of doing private counseling, I learned something. Most people want honesty as long as it's not honest. You ever had somebody come to you and go, now be honest with me? And you thought, really? I have been waiting for this. So you zapped them with honesty, and what was their reaction? Not that honest. Do you think most people are designed to handle truth? I mean, let me just put the question to you. Do you always want everyone in your life to be totally honest with you? No. And can anything in life improve without honesty? No. What steals? Refusing to change. If I came to your life, you think I could find any places where you could improve? And do you think if we sat and talked about them, they'd come as a surprise? Understand something. Resistance shuts down your creativity. Resistance shuts down your creativity. Excuses become a way of life. Rather than facing things, what do? I make an excuse. And isn't an excuse just a way of justifying your world of sameness? Negative environments. Any of you ever had a negative person in your life? Huh? Can they own you emotionally? Huh? See, negative people only have two things on their agenda: manipulation and control. And how do they do that? They make you feel guilty. You ever had somebody who used the guilt card on you? And by the way, negative people are only in your life because you give them permission to be there. And I don't care how strong you think you are, negative people will pull you down. So you've got to confront them. And I can tell you a fun way to get rid of negative people. 99% of you wouldn't do it. Take them to lunch and order theirs to go. Will be the best lunch you've ever had in your life. What steals people's personal strength? Getting down on self. You ever get down on you? You ever had those days where you don't want to get out of bed? You ever had those days where you felt like you were walking around with a black cloud over your head? You ever had one of those days where your life was simply a pattern of resistance? And every time you talked about what was wrong with your life. They feel their way through situations. See, and this is very challenging. Because what does that mean? I emotionally react to what's happening in my life. Please understand this. Your emotions are all about what you feel. Your mind is all about what you can create. So if I'm living from my emotions up, what am I doing? I'm living through my feelings. And most of the time, those feelings are negative. So my mind keeps saying, let's go. And your emotions go, we're not going anywhere. Because you either live through your emotions or your creativity. And which do you think most people live through? Their emotions. Have to do it their way. You ever been around someone who's stubborn? And we think stubborn is someone who's set in their ways. That's not psychologically true. Stubbornness is the resistance to change because of fear. And that has nothing to do with age. Now, if I took that and use it as a barometer to your life, would you be challenged by anything there? And you understand, every one of those is a nibbler. Every one of those takes strength out of your life. And every one of those is a choice. The worst thing you can do with your life is waste it. Now, what am I talking about? Again, see if you're guilty of any of this. You wait for things to just happen. You know one of the little statements in life that'll drive me up a wall? If it's meant to be, it will be. I just want to pick the person up and shake them and go, hey, listen, what about being creative? What about facing it? What about trusting yourself? What about not procrastinating? What about not waiting? What about seeing what you can do with your life? Because every day you wait, you've wasted the greatest gift you have, which is time. Always have an excuse for your actions. You ever lived there? You ever justified what you weren't doing with an excuse? Stare at perceived wrongs of yesterday. Hear me say this. Yesterday is a reference library, not a room to live in. You ever met somebody who lived in yesterday? Why? They buy a little piece of land and they build a little cabin on it. They go down the Cracker Barrel and buy themselves a rocking chair and they sit on the front porch and they just rock through their life, justifying what they're not with all the wrongs that have happened. In every yesterday, there is a positive. In every yesterday, in every event, there is a lesson. People ask me all the time, Richard, would you go back and change your childhood? Absolutely not. Would I rather it had been different? Yes. But would I go back and change it? No. Why? Because it's who I am today. And if I had chosen to lay in the fetal position, I would be someone who thinks that they're entitled for everybody to do everything for them and to take care of them. But I understood something. If my life was going to achieve anything, I had to be accountable for my life. I had to be accountable for my choices. And it wasn't my mother's fault. But she gave me a situation that I could either drown in or I could rise above. Time is disrespected. Any of you ever procrastinate? You ever seen someone like this? I come to you and I tell you, I got a project I want you to do, and I'm going to give you 2 weeks to do it. And you sit there and go, 2 weeks. 14 days. I come back a week later and I go, hey, how you doing on the project? And you go, oh, got a week. I'll get it done. I come back the day it's due and I go, are you ready? And they go, is that today? So what do? We kick into gear and throw something together. And what are we doing? disrespecting the time that we have. Expect others to take care of them. You ever seen people who live in a world where they expect everyone to do everything for them? And if they don't do it, what happens? They get upset. I used to do a lot of marriage counseling. And, you've got to, again, know God had a sense of humor. He put man and woman together on this earth to live harmoniously. I mean, have you ever thought about this? Would you marry someone like you and expect it to last? Huh? And here's what I found in the counseling room. So many times in that room, what I was listening to was, well, he never did what I needed him to do. She never did what I needed her to do. And I'd go, hey, a relationship that's based on need is self-destructive. It's not about what someone does for you. It's about what they want to be in this relationship. And folks, there are two things you got to learn about relationships today. They die when couples stop dating. They die when couples stop dating. You ever notice the extent a couple will go to before they get married? Well, he'll take her out on a date. And he pays for it. Why, he even talks. Then they get married. Well, it's one of the first things they stop doing. Dating. You know the other thing? I heard this all the time. I'm not in love with him anymore. That's a lie. Because if you've been in love with someone, you'll always be in love with them. What you fall out of love with is what the relationship has deteriorated to. And that's because two people chose to disconnect. They chose. It's not the events of life that stop you. It's your behavior that creates the crisis. Life never stops you. Your behavior does.